So today I would like to build a sequencing setup in the node grid inspired by the hardware module Oct Tone. This is how it looks like. As always, I added also the ideas from this video to the PDF of tips and tricks I keep on updating. It's available on my Patreon together with the project file and preset from this video and from many other videos. And let's take a look quickly at the hardware module. We have up to 8 steps. Of course, this can be also shorter. We have a gate sequence, right? We can set the gates or triggers per step. Maybe I will go with something like this. Right, and then we have also values that we can change. In this case, it will control pitch. Right, so we have gates, we have pitch in this case. And already the first thing we can do is use this switch to switch between forward direction and random direction. Right, so we can run randomly also across the sequence. This can be a nice performative tool, but in Bitwig, of course, we can also automate things, modulate things. So we can also control this externally. Another feature here is the ability to set, let me stop this for a second, to set multiple pulses on each of the steps. So for example, if I want step 2 to count, let's say 3 steps instead of 2, right? So it will be in the length of 3 steps. And let's say this step here, the 5th step, will be in the length of 4 steps, right? It will count 4 pulses. Right, so now we have more variation here. Right, and we have a longer sequence, so we can set again each of the steps to count more pulses. And we can also select if each of the steps will output also the pulses, all of the pulses within this step. So for now, we just have silence. Right, but for example, I can set this step here to output also the triggers while it counts the pulses. Right, so we can also get the triggers from this step at the length of the pulses that it counts. Another interesting thing here is that we have also a gate output per step. Right, so we can mix them, combine them, and create new rhythms and add, for example, accents. Right, so I'm going to use just a simple mixer. Again, they don't happen at the same time, so we are not really mixing them, we are more combining them, and this will add accents to this voice. So let's say step 1, and maybe this step here, and this one. Right, so we have accents also from those 3 steps. And of course, we can use this also to trigger additional voices. So I can use step 2, for example. Right, to trigger another voice. So we will build this in the node grid, and already we can remove the inputs module, right? We will generate everything we need with the sequencer. And let's start with the basic setup. We will create an 8-step sequencer with the merge module, right? We can set it to have 8 steps. And if we set this to nearest, it will switch between the notes in this case, instead of cross-fading between them. Now to enter the notes, we will use 8 transpose modules, right? 1 for each input. And with them, we can change the notes per step, right? So we have 8 all in all. I would also like to stay in a specific scale, so I will use the pitch quantize module. This will be connected to the output of the merge, and then I will go with D, E flat, G, A, and then B flat, right? And this we can already send to the pitch output. We will also use the gates sequencer or the gates module here to gate our voice or to trigger our voice. So in this case, we will set it to trigger, so it's not always on. And I will also activate here mute when stopped. So when we stop, also the sound will stop. And this will go to the gate output here. For now, we'll also activate all the gates. And you can see that here on the device itself, I have no voices here on this track, right? I have no devices. I have just the node grid with this setup on this track. But I have here another track, right, with a polymer synthesizer, and it's set up to receive notes from the node grid, right? So if I hit play, right, you can see this voice is playing according to this setup on the node grid. Now we need a way to switch between the steps of the sequence, and for this we will use the triggers module. This module will dictate the note length, right? So in my case I will go with 16th notes. Also here I will activate mute when stopped, and I will use the triggers to trigger the phase counter module. Right, this will count through the steps because we have 8 steps all in all. We can just leave it at 8. And again, this will scan through the merge module. And I would like to have everything in sync. So this will scan also through the gates sequence here, right? I deactivate the pre-code here for the phase, and I will use the same phase signal. So now the sequence will run with 16th notes. And we can start changing the notes of the steps. Right? So we have a sequence, and the first thing I would like to do is to add random direction, right? Just like on the hardware module. For this, we can use the dice module here. This module will generate random values that we can use to randomly scan through the sequence. So for triggering it, we will use the same triggers from the triggers module. And now if I extend this to scan through the merge and through the sequence, now the gate sequence, both sequences will run randomly. And let's add a way to switch between normal direction and random direction. For this, we will use the select in module. The first input will be the counter. The second input will be the randomness. And then from the select output here, select in, we will control the phase of both sequences. Right, and now we can use a simple button here just to switch between both directions. Right, so if the button will be here, let's say this will go to the switch input, right? So now we have forward or normal direction, and then we have randomness. Right, so like this you can decide which direction you want the sequencer to have. And let's add now the next feature, which is changing the length of each step, how many pulses it will count. For this, we will add the clock divide module between the triggers and the counter. Right, so this we will just add here in between, set it to 1, so now we have the same result. But now if I divide the triggers, right, it will count more triggers for each step. And this will be the way we can make each step count longer, right? Now we will do a few things here. First of all, I would like to have things in sync. So what I will do, I will use the transport playing module here to reset the clock divide and to reset the counter. So every time we hit play, everything will start from the same point. And to control things, let's use the steps sequencer. I will set it again to run with the same phase from the select input, so everything is running together even when it's running randomly. And I will use it to control the divisions. Now, since we start from 1, right, a division of 1, and we have maximum of 8 steps, so 8 pulses, we will set it to a value of 7. So I'm going to map the division just a bit, turn off the mapping, and now here if I click or hold Control and click it once, I can enter an exact value which will be 7, right? So again, the maximum will be 8 pulses or a division of 8, right? So now we have again the same result, but now right, it will count more pulses for these steps, and we have an interesting result. Now I would like also to add an option to have the triggers still triggering the voice even when the note is longer. So for this we will need to do a few things. First of all, I would like to have more control over the gate length from the gates module. Right, so I will send it first through the gate length module here, right? We can leave it for now at 50 milliseconds. Then I would like to combine it with the trigger. So we can do this, for example, with OR logic, right? OR logic means that whenever the gates sequencer or the triggers or both are active, are running or are high, right? We will get a gate out of the OR output here. Right, so now if I hit play, even on the steps where we have longer pulses here, it will still output pulses because again, we are combining both triggers. Right, again, without, and now with. Right, but I will also like to have the ability to choose on which steps the triggers will go through. And for this, we can gate the triggers with another gates module. So what we will do, we will use the multiply module here, right? Send the triggers first through it and then back to the OR module. The multiply module will allow us to use a gate to gate the triggers. So we can use another gates sequencer, again run it with the same phase from the select in module, and this will go to the second output of the multiply and will dictate on which steps the triggers will actually go through. Right, so here for example I want on this step only that the triggers will go through. Right, I activate it. Right, and now only on this step, even though we have a longer step or more pulses to count, it will still output the triggers. Now the last thing I would like to add is the individual gate outputs, again, just like on the hardware module, and this is quite simple. In this case, we can use the split module, again set it to 8 because we have 8 steps, again to nearest, so it will switch instead of crossfade, and then use the gates right from the sequencer, from the gate length module. And now we have for each output, we have a gate only when the step is active on the respective steps, right? So if I hit play, right, and I run it with the same phase from the select input, I can use, for example, a scope. Now you can see, for example, if I want the gate only from step 3, right, only when this step is active, we get a gate, right? If I want it from step 7, right, we get the individual gates now that we can use in all sorts of ways. By the way, if you wanted to output also the continuous triggers, you can use the signal from the OR output, right, instead of the gate length. And again, we can use the trigger for something like accents, for example. So if I use an attack decay envelope, right, make it nice and snappy. Maybe I will use 3 gates. I can combine them with a mixer. Again, they will not happen at the same time, so we are not really mixing them. We are more combining them. So let's go with the step 1, step 4, and step 6. Right, so we have 3 gates from 3 different steps. This will trigger the envelope. And then we have multiple options. We can use, for example, the timbre output here on the note output device, right? So if I send this to the timbre output, this envelope will come out from the timbre control here. So for example, on the voice, I have here the expressions modulator. And again, I can use the timbre, for example, to add accents, for example, to the filter. Right, and again, this will come from the from the envelope with the 3 gates. Right, so now we have accent just on these specific steps. We can also use this to trigger other voices, right? So here, for example, I have a bass. In this case, I have it set to MIDI channel number 2, and it's also set to receive notes from the same note grid, right? So again, if I go back here, right, I can add another note output device. In this case, I will change it to MIDI channel number 2, again, just like the channel of the bass that I have. And again, mix a few triggers or a few gates with a mixer. Again, we are not really mixing anything because they don't happen at the same time. It's more combining them, right? So let's go with step 2, 5, and let's say also 7, right? And again, this will trigger the bass. Right, again, the bass is set to MIDI channel 2, receiving notes from the same note grid. Right, I have here 2 layers polygrid and a sub-oscillator. Right, and the same setup, the same Oct Tone setup here is triggering also another voice. And again, this is how the finished setup will look like. I have it saved also as a preset. Right here, there are a few notes that will give you a few hints of what's going on. I added also a control here for sequence length, right? So you can have less than 8 steps, but still have different steps with, let me solo this for a second. This will sequence another voice here that I have. Right, so you can have 8 steps. Right, you can have also longer pulses, or have right shorter. You can select where you want the pulses to come out of. Right, also here I have sorts of accents. Right, you can turn off gates if you want. Right, you can change the notes, right, so you have here sequence length, direction, step length, including the pulses, you have here CV, the pitch, and you have gates, you have here the gate outputs, and here down there's a sort of the brain. Here it's everything that's helping to control the sequence length, right, I have here 2 modulators, right, so this will modulate, they will control different things here, right, just to change the length of the sequences. Right, and this is how the setup looks like. Let me unsolo this. Right, and again there's the button for forward or random. Right, I have here also a kick, a clap and hi-hats. Before I bring them in, thank you again so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Cheers!